boys and girls, it's Iron Wings 3187 coming at you with another episode of Iron Wings Reviews. So today, I'm doing a long time video that I've been meaning to record, but I've been kind of putting off for a special occasion, and I just reached 200 followers. So today, what I will be reviewing is my Springfield manufactured 1942 M1 Garand. Now keep in mind the actual operating system, the trigger mechanism itself, is from 1952, which this is a CMP expert grade, so there's going to be mismatching parts. They just kind of put together the best examples they had to make it the best functioning rifle they can. For anyone who's a longtime viewer of my channel, you know I am quite the M1 and M1 Garand action fanatic. Now, to be truthful with it, when it comes to the Mini 30 and the Mini 14 I have here, the choice of owning them is more out of a sense of practicality. Behind enemy lines here in California, if you want to own a centerfire, semi-automatic, magazine-fed rifle, in other words, what they call an assault weapon, you cannot have a separate pistol grip. If you do, and it accepts detachable magazines that are capable of being 10 rounds or more, doesn't matter if you own 10-round magazines or more. If it has a separate pistol grip, you are required by law to have a fin grip or some other means of basically making it to where it does not have that pistol grip. It has to be featureless. Many people will install a thumbhole stock on M1s and AKs. You will see some people just put a plastic fin on their pistol grip. Basically, in all sense of practicality, the AR-15 and AK platforms are kind of less practical to me than owning something like this, chambered in 5.56 NATO and 223, or something like this in 7.62x39. And the reason I actually prefer this over something like an SKS is because this comes with a factory bore diameter of 0.308. And that's actually pretty handy because that means I can theoretically, and have, shared the same bullets that I use in the M1 Garand here when reloading 7.62x39 brass case due to the shortage of steel cased ammo that will be eventually coming for that cartridge. But that's off topic. Today I actually wanted to discuss my M1 Garand. This is a clip-fed, semi-automatic, 30-06 chambered rifle, manufactured in 1942 for the U.S. Army in World War II, and it is actually one of my favorite rifles. The reason being that these are, while not the most practical rifle to be used in modern times, these are almost universally exempt from any restrictions or laws that you will find in places like California, because these are, in theory, still capable of being hunting rifles. I'll go into that later. As I say, this is chambered in 30-06. You will find them, if they were from the Navy, for example, after the Korean War and into Vietnam, you'll find them chambered in 7.62x51 NATO. I've seen all sorts of weird combinations of the M1 Garand system, where people have basically gotten one that had no barrel left to it, had it rebarreled to a cartridge that's smaller in diameter, and that's what they'll use. But yeah, this is a 1942 year manufacture, Springfield Armory receiver, a Criterion barrel, and a 1952 production year internal magazine and trigger assembly. The trigger guard itself, though, is actually a milled 1940 production according to the CMP paperwork I have. This is a, as I stated, CMP expert grade M1 Garand, meaning what they do is they take all the best parts out of certain rifles, so the receiver if it's in the best shape, the bolt carrier group, the op rod, everything. They will sit there and they will gunsmith the hell out of these rifles until they get it running smoothly, put on a new Criterion match grade barrel, and then they will sell them. This is actually one of the higher end grades that they can sell you, and I actually got this in a horse trade. So, to clarify, I've been shooting M1 Garand since I want to say 14 when my uncle had one. Unfortunately, he sold it to his friend when some money issues came up. And once that happened, his friend got a divorce, and the rifle wound up going to his wife, who sold it for pennies on the dollar. Tale as old as time. Anyway, I've been shooting M1 Garand since I was about 13, so I'm quite familiar with their operation. And I never actually thought I would own one because these things are getting ridiculously priced. For those of you who don't know, you can get one of these from the CMP for, I want to say, $950 to $975. And then they go and resell, like, people can resell these things, I think, for like $1,200 to $1,300. Because CMP, their expert grade, is sold out at the moment. Don't know when that'll restock. But when CMP tends to sell out of certain grades, like shooter grade or match grade, like this, expert grade, they tend to go up in value, and you can resell them because if someone wants a Garand that they're able to shoot and is going to be accurate, you're able to basically ask what you want for the thing. I mean, you see people asking $1,800 for like factory new surplus M1 Garands that have no modifications. They didn't come with a CMP. They are just like basically bring homes from soldiers. Anyway, this rifle is chambered, as I stated, in 30-06 and feeds from an 8-round detachable in-block clip. The only reason I say detachable is, theoretically, you can load this in. Keep in mind, I am trained in this. And then hit this little latch on the side. Let me show you. This is a latch that you can hit and it will eject your end block clip. It was a little awkward there because I am currently trying to keep this action from ramming home, just because I don't want to... Basically, this end block is loaded up with a bunch of dummy rounds. For those who don't know, the M1 Garand is a bit finicky with what ammo it can shoot. It is a long stroke gas piston design that is tapped at the very end of the muzzle, and basically this entire section here is the gas port, and from the first barrel band back is the entire operating rod. So this thing, with as long as the gas system is, if you shoot modern commercial 30-06 ammunition in it, modern 30-06 ammunition, let me go ahead and... This is my Hodgdon reloading manual from 2022. This is the most up-to-date that you can get currently. And it has basically the load data for any kind of cartridge that's currently popular in the United States. And let's see if I can find my 30-06 load data here. Keep in mind I've used this quite a bit, so I have a lot of sections highlighted, but here we are. So modern loads for the 30-06, this is not for the M1 Garand. This is not M2 ball load data. But from what I remember, the M2 ball load data, you want to get going at about 2790, something like that. But from what I remember, it is quite a bit slower than this. For example, here your median velocity for a 150 grain Nosler boat tail projectile loaded with IMR 4895. Let's see here. Here we are. IMR 4895. So if you were to load that up with 49 grains of IMR 4895, that's the lower end, you would get 2,856 feet per second. If you were to load it to the max, like some people do for larger game, you're looking at 3,009 feet per second. While it isn't a massive leap, so I was right, it's supposed to be somewhere around 2790, I think, for M2 ball ammo. It never fails. It never does. When I'm doing these kind of videos, there's a train. So I'll just wait for it to pass, and then I'll cut the noise out after that. Well, though. Anyway, 3,009 feet per second, that's almost 200 feet per second more than the M1 Garand was meant. And I'm not going to do the math here. Ian and Carl over on In Range TV have done the math before when loading for M1 Garand ammunition. And basically, if you load modern, for example, these reloads, if you load modern 30-06 factory ammunition, or someone's reloads for like a bolt action Springfield that's loaded up very hot, you're looking at potentially warping the operating rod, you're looking at overgassing the system and damaging the whole rifle. And I say theoretically because there is the potential for you to single load a round into the chamber, but it's not the best for the extractor, and given that spare parts for the M1 Garand basically amount to a small down payment for a mortgage, yeah, it's best to basically get into hand loading. So the reason I have an entire clip full of dummy rounds here is because I have to hand load for this rifle, and every time I hand load, depending on the projectile I am loading for it, for example, if I want to do some hollow points for hunting that I've stocked up on, depending on the bullet length, I have to reset my length, my seating and crimp dies to the length of that particular bullet. So I have accumulated probably something like 30 dummy rounds of frickin' 30-06 that have no powder in them, have no primer in the back, but are basically, for all intents and purposes, the same length of an average 30-06, and I just sit there and I put like a dud primer in the base of the bullet so that way I can like pull the trigger on the M1 Garand without damaging the firing pin or the bolt face. This actually caused a bit of controversy a while back because when I showed how to partially load an M1 Garand clip, and I do say clip because this is an in-block clip, this isn't a magazine, this is a clip. It holds the ammunition in the rifle. It's not detachable. It doesn't hold bullets inside of a shell. It is a clip. When I showed how to partially top off a clip or to just load an empty clip in the rifle itself, I did it in an awkward way where you will sit there and basically to partial load one of these rifles, it is a three-handed job almost. Because you have to sit there, hold the bolt back, and load individual bullets into a clip in order to load the rifle. And when you're trying to hold a phone, hold the bolt back, and load these individual rounds at the same time, it really is kind of a kludge of a system. Unfortunately, I don't think I made that very clear in my actual video, my short, because I had a lot of comments talking about, oh, that's dangerous, that's not safe, you're gonna destroy your rifle, this, that, the other. And it just kind of goes to show how in the firearms community we tend to think of one another. We don't tend to assume the best of people. We tend to think of ourselves as being the only intelligent person in a room full of idiots. And to be fair, oftentimes, I can understand why that is an issue because in 2020 to 2021, we had the biggest jump in new gun owners since I want to say the 1960s and 1970s. But point still remains in the fact that people just naturally assume that I am dumb enough or unintelligent enough that I'm going to sit there in my living room and load up an M1 Garand with the potential of slamming my finger in the action or loading a live round in the chamber, and because of the free-floating firing pin, firing off a round just for a YouTube clout. And that's not really the case. As I stated, I've got plenty of dummy rounds to do this with. It's just, you kind of see people assume the worst, and they feel they have to lecture you. And I kind of understand it because that's just kind of the status of the firearms community now, where people feel the need to lecture just because they assume you don't know better. But it's like, I've been shooting for almost 20 years competitively. Never won because, I'm not the best shot. I still shoot. I've been shooting competitively for almost 20 years since I was 7 years old when I was in youth league at our local gun club. I've been in the U.S. Army. At what point, with the amount of experience I have with firearms, firearm disassembly, firearms maintenance, and even some gunsmithing, must someone have a certain level of experience that you don't call them out for being a quote-unquote idiot? I don't know. That's not too germane to this review, but it's just something that I have noticed in the firearms community. And personally, I think it really does kind of link to why people tend to think of us as uneducated rednecks, because when you have a bunch of people that just come off as angry, indignant, and stubborn, thinking they know better than everyone else, it does not endear you to individuals not too familiar with the community. That's the number one thing I've had issues with as a gun club member, is new members will often come and they feel intimidated by the people that have been shooting a long time, because we tend to think these people need to know our level of knowledge, and that's not typically the case. When you have people that show up with a High Point C9 they bought for $120 in a local pawn shop, have no shooting experience and bought it for home defense, but they want to get some target practice in and learn how to use it, you need to take the time and the patience to let these people understand. You need to educate them, but not do so in a fact that you come off as aggressive, angry, because then you intimidate these people. They don't want to come back. They don't want to learn how to properly use that weapon. And when they do that and there's a negligent discharge, or that guy gets killed in a home defense situation because he doesn't know how to use his firearm properly, I think that reflects poorly on the firearms community at large, mainly because we alienated that individual. And it's all too common, I find, in our community. No drama, no issues. I just find that I think we should take a little bit more time to understand people and try to help them rather than just assume everyone should be on the same knowledge base as ourselves. Anyway, that's not germane to this review. So, as I stated, I reload for the 30-06. I load M2 ball ammunition, simulated, with Varget. I won't say the powder charge or the velocity, any of that other stuff, because unlike Ron Spomer, with only being 200 subscribers deep into a channel, I don't think I could get away with that with YouTube's guidelines. It is a, as I stated, semi-automatic, gas-operated, magazine-fed rifle. And it was one of the first ones in the world that was like the primary weapon of an army. There were other gas-operated rifles at the time, but a lot of those were kind of a lot more awkward than the M1 Garand. For example, the Mondragoon. The Mondragoon rifle from Mexico was based off the 1895-1893 Spanish Mauser system. And if I remember correctly, it could operate in both bolt action and semi-automatic. It was a really kludgy system, but it was one of the more advanced rifles of its time and actually quite refined compared to the European efforts. In the European theater, you had things like the RSC-18, which was a massive kludge. It operated basically on the same exact principle as the M1 Garand, but was way, way more kludge-like with an exposed operating rod, fed by a 5-round end-block clip because the French army couldn't seem to get away from the 8mm Lebel cartridge, and wouldn't until around World War II. You had things like the Mauser Gewehr 41, which was basically after World War I, Germany kind of wanted to get into the semi-automatic rifle game, and they set down this really just awkward set of guidelines. Ian goes over it in Forgotten Weapons, where it had to operate in bolt action form if the rifle failed to stop working as a semi-automatic. It couldn't use a gas operating system, but they didn't want it to be like long recoil action. All this weird, awkward stuff that just made Mauser's efforts, when they stuck to it, this massive kludge of a rifle with an extremely long action length. And it was just, Germany admitted they basically screwed up by giving that criteria and ignored it when they went with the Walther Gewehr 41 design instead, that completely ignored all those guidelines, which eventually developed into the Gewehr 43. I could be wrong about that. It could be an entire other operating system because I haven't dug that far into the German operating rifles. But yeah, there were semi-automatic rifles before this one, basically across every theater of operation. You had the Fedorov Automat from, and the SVT-40 from Russia. Like I said, all the Gewehr prototypes and the Gewehr 43 from Germany, the RSC-18. Basically, all these rifles did exist prior to the Garand, or at the time of the Garand, but they were much less refined and much more finicky, to the point where the RSC-18 was very popular because it's an auto-loading rifle, but because it was such an awkward system, both because of the Berthier end-block clips, or the Mannlicher clips, and the exposed action that basically worked on the show shot principle, it was just kind of seen as a kludge and not as, I keep saying that, kludge, refined, but it wasn't as successful as the Garand. It was still seen as a very specialized arm for World War I that was basically disposed of after World War I because development continued on without the 8mm Lavelle. Um, so that's why I say this isn't the first auto-loading rifle, far from it, but is the first mass-produced, basically in a world where basically every major superpower or every power in World War II was arming their soldiers with Mauser derivatives or the Mosin Nagant, the U.S. went with the M1 Garand for the bulk of their standard infantry. And that was revolutionary because, again, you're talking about Germany with the Kar 98K, Russia moving to the 9130 and the M44 carbines, Finland still with the Mosin derivatives, the Finnish Mosin derivatives, Japan with the Arisaka line of rifles, the Type 99, I think, rifle, but I could be wrong about that, and Britain with the Lee Enfield. So, in a world full of bolt actions, this is revolutionary, and it is a very refined system for the time. The biggest issue from the Garand really is not from the clip, because the clip is still very practical, and in fact I know a lot of guys who argue that the M1 Garand in 308 is one of the more popular, or one of their more popular choices, I should say, not the more popular because it's not, but one of their more popular or first choices for like a emergency bug out rifle, because you can carry a box full of these loaded with 7.62 by 51 NATO, and a box, like in my safe, I have a ammo can filled with close to 300 rounds of hand-load 30-06 on clips, and that thing probably weighs 10 pounds. 300 rounds of full-power rifle ammunition, as opposed to if you were to carry an AR-15 set of magazines, 30 rounds if you were to carry 10 magazines, you wouldn't have the power, you wouldn't have the range, you wouldn't have the versatility of the 30-06, because 30-06 you can load up and down to take just about every game on the continent of the United States. So there are guys, same thing with 7.62 by 51. There are a lot of guys who carry these because clips take up a lot less room than magazines, and you can pick these up off the ground and just keep loading them. Whereas with a magazine, if the spring fails in it, you're screwed. So it's not from the clip, it's not from the actual rifle itself really, because the gas operating system was designed for a specific loading, but given that was designed in the 1940s, back when modern metallurgy and modern loading powders like 4895 were still kind of being developed and come to their modern iteration, I think we can't exactly begrudge that of the Garand for not being gassed for modern ammunition, especially modern loads that are meant for taking medium to large game in 30-06. No, the big issue with the Garand comes from the fact that it is hefty. This sucker weighs in at almost 8 to 9 pounds. Now, that usually is not that big of an issue because I own a Remington 700 in 30-06 that I gave to my father because I absolutely hated the fucking rifle. I could not stand it because this rifle I can take out to the range and I can shoot maybe 100 rounds of 30-06 before my shoulder gets completely shot like hamburger meat. With the Remington 700 that I own, the Mountaineer model with a carbon stock and stainless steel furniture, stainless steel barrel, bolt, everything else, because that only weighs 5 to 6 pounds, a good couple pounds less than this, I can only shoot about 10 to 15 rounds of 30-06 out of it before I am just tapped out and done for the day. Like, that's not saying I'm done with 30-06. That's, I can't shoot any more rifles after that. And some people say, oh, you're just a lightweight, or oh, you're a wimp because wait until you shoot 300 Winchester Magnum. But it's like, we're not talking light target loads here like you would get out of a Mossberg 500 where you have different gradients. This is full power, maximum load hunting rifle ammo that I am zeroing for like mule deer and elk at the range. And if I can't shoot, the thing is, a rifle, the deer rifle has to have a delicate balance. And this is not a deer rifle, it has the potential to be, and again I'll get into that in a little bit, but deer rifles, you have to hit a kind of perfect crossroad. You have to hit a balance between the weight of the rifle, because you're going to be lugging it around hills, forests, mountains, whatever, and you have to hit controllability or comfort. So, the thing is, Remington, in my experience with this rifle, did not manage to hit that because this is a later production rifle. It was meant to be very light, hence the name of Mountaineer. It's meant to be light so you can carry it all day and take 1 or 2 shots with it, as opposed to a range rifle where you're going to be able to take it, like target rifles, you can take shots all day and not feel it really at the end of the day because it's got so much heft, the rifle minimizes the effect on you. So this rifle, despite the massive weight and because it's shooting lower velocity M2 loads, is much more comfortable to shoot, but I can see why this fell out of favor and why the M14 fell out of favor. At 8 to 9 pounds, this sucker weighs a ton for a modern combat rifle, and it is very outdated because of that. At a time where a lot of modern soldiers are carrying M4s and some of them are still stuck carrying the M16A2s, I can see why people would say this weighs too much and that's a flaw, and I can understand that. The other thing worth talking about is the trigger. Now, the M1 Garand trigger is very much similar to the military triggers of the time. That being, and you can see here, action is empty, nothing in the chamber. And I always double check anyway. The trigger itself is nothing spectacular. You got your safety in front of it. It's a little stiff on this rifle, but to be fair, I kind of like that because you can't accidentally switch it off. The trigger is kind of similar to a lot of military triggers at the time. You have the very spongy first stage that's kind of a safety almost unto itself, and then you have a very hefty uptick. So, as I stated, soft, spongy trigger, and then I would say that trigger pull is probably similar to, I can't even put it in the pound range because I don't have my measure here, but I would say that's probably 5 to 6 pound range, but I could be off. It's a military trigger. It's not match grade. It's not going to be target ready in terms of like sub MOAs at 1,000 yards, but it'll do. Alright, sorry about that, folks. I don't know when that video cut off, so I'll have to go back and review and maybe do some reshoots after the fact. But anyway, where I was after I checked my camera was, basically, let's go into the discussion of how I got this rifle. So, basically, I, about 6 months ago, was talking to one of my friends from the local gun club. I won't say his name on camera for the sake of his respecting his privacy. He bought this from the CMP program about a year ago. He wanted an M1 Garand for the longest time, M1 Garand, or Garand, however you want to pronounce it. And he's one of the individuals where when he goes to shoot, when he goes target shooting, he's not satisfied at like 100, 200, 300 yards. What he wants is to be able to take a rifle out to like 1,000 or 1,500 yards and shoot targets with it and get reliable groups that are like supposedly sub MOA. Now the M1 Garand can be taken out to 1,000 or 1,500 yards theoretically because of the 30-06 round, but it's not going to give you the best groups at that distance because this is not a marksman's rifle, this is not a sniper's rifle, this is a battle rifle. It's meant for, I think, within like 500 to 600 yards. So, he doesn't like it that much. It's not what he was expecting. It's not what he wants. He wants $1,000 for the rifle so he can get a match grade target rifle. I don't have the cash at the time because it's $1,000. You can't just whip that out of nowhere. I mean, I'm sure someone like Jeff Bezos can, but for the average guy, that usually means you sell off a couple of guns, and in this case, that's pretty much what I did. Every time I start shooting, and there's a train. Swear to God. I'm going to have to cut this out, this section anyway. I approached my friend, who wanted $1,000 for this rifle. I dug out something that was in the back of my closet, my safes and everything, that had been there for a little bit longer, like a year and a half, that I was originally going to do a review on for this channel. Thing is, the rifle is too large, too bulky, too much of a pain to review, and the ammunition it takes is harder to find than 30-06 at the time. I only had like 20 rounds of it, and it was an FN SPR in 308 762 by 51. My local gun shop sells out of 762 by 51 NATO and 308 almost as soon as it comes in, so I've only ever managed to source one box for it. But I have a ton of brass, I just haven't gotten around to reloading because powder shortages, so on and so forth. Basically, if you lived in the pandemic from 2020 to 2022, you know what I'm talking about. So I take this rifle out, show it to Dan, and I say, I will trade you this for your M1 Garand. And to give a little context, as I stated, god damn it, I keep doing that. So I take this FN SPR out to my friend, and I tell him, I will trade this for your M1 Garand. And for a little bit of context, my friend is a modern military, modern tactical rifle nut. He has several ARs in California. He has several AKs, all legally modified for the state. All this different crap. So yeah, he absolutely loves modern rifles, whereas I'm more of a old school collector of things like the Garands, the Mausers, the Mosins, that sort of thing. Nothing against the modern rifles, it's just, being from California, I don't really like them. And they don't hold the same kind of appeal as something like an M1 Garand does. So the FN SPR is a close to 20-pound rifle made with barrel blanks from a 240 machine gun that FN produced for military trials and for police use. This one got surplused off from a police station, bought it from my friend who bought it at auction, and basically it's certified to get sub-MOA groups out to like 1,200 yards, and I think one MOA group's out to like 1,600 yards. So my friend is excited and happy about it. He's all like jumping for joy because this is exactly what he wants. He wants something with that thick, bold barrel that weighs like 20 pounds, so it moves almost not at all. And so he readily, like at the moment I make the offer, jumps in and says, deal. We go, we do the paperwork, we do the transfer, and so I walk home with this M1 Garand. I've shot it, it's okay. I don't have any targets with me to show the groups, unfortunately, because again, I purged a lot of my targets, and I haven't taken this out in a bit, but it shoots well. And for some reason, I'm just seemingly a natural at shooting the Garand. I always kind of have been. I think it's the ghost ring sights, but then I don't understand why it was I was so shit in the Army with my AR, or my M16A2, and my M4. Anyway, so my thoughts on the M1 Garand. For a modern military rifle, it would be woefully outdated. There are still some units, I think, in the Philippines and the Korean Peninsula that have these in reserves as basically a last resort weapon. I know Ethiopia had a lot of them. Same thing with BARs. But for a modern military rifle, it would be woefully behind the times. Just because it means you would have to basically specifically manufacture a set type of 30-06 instead of just being able to go to a manufacturing company and say, just give me a batch of like 100,000 rounds of 30-06 from your production line. The sights are actually quite brilliant because it has that standard ghost ring sight and tri-wing, I guess you would call it, front sight, where it has two sight protector wings on one on each side plus the central post. And it just kind of directly guides your eye to the front sight. It just feels natural when you shoot this rifle. The stock is fairly hefty. It's not going to really break or be damaged anytime soon. And I don't know, there's just something that feels good when you shoot a Garand. It's not about the history, it's not about the, oh, my granddad used this to kill Nazis in World War II. It's none of that crap that people always talk about, or, you know, when they get the Mauser, oh, Wamphenump. No, there's something satisfying, just something I can't qualify when you shoot an M1 Garand. The fact that you can just sit there, rock it back, load in a clip, and then just send the bolt forward. Now, of course, sometimes you have to give it an encouragement and slap the charging handle, but point still remains, there is just something that works with this rifle for me. It just feels natural, it feels good, and I truly love the M1 Garand. Do I recommend anyone go out and buy one for more than, say, $1,100, $1,200? No. Not on this planet could I ever, in good conscience, recommend you go out and buy a rifle for that amount of money when it's an M1 Garand. Because you can get, like, FN FALs or H&K G3s, things that are much more modern, take detachable magazines, and modern military cartridges that... I'm not talking the legitimate original FALs and G3s, because those would be well out of your price range, because those would be qualified as a machine gun. But you can get FAL and G3 clones for, from what I've seen, close to $2,000, and you can own 2 M1 Garands at that price, but you could also own a more modern rifle that doesn't rely on 8-round magazines, 8-round clips that limit your capacity. At the same time, if you're in a restrictive state like California, New York, Chicago, Illinois, I should say, a lot more states are more lenient towards the M1 Garand because of its historical provenance than they are something like the AR-15 designs or AKs, where they see those as more intimidating for some reason. And don't even get me started on Jerry Nadler and his whole, oh, the 30-06 is older, it's slower, it's not as effective. To dispute that, this is a 150 grain bullet going 27,900 feet per second. That's enough to drop pretty much anything on the North American continent up to about a bull moose. You may want something a little hotter for a bull moose, but there are people who have dropped bull moose with old surplus M2 ball ammo. This 7.62x39 is a 123 grain bullet. Ballistically, in terms of velocity, it's very similar to 30-30. So again, let's whip out the Hodgdon reloading manual, much like Ron Spomer does. So 150 grain boat tail. Well, let's go ahead and go down. A 125 grain hollow point, which for 30-30, let's just say it's a flat nose hollow point, loaded with the same thing I use for this 30-31 on the backside here. This loaded with 30-31 would be going, well, actually there isn't one for 30-31. Okay, so let's go with the other one I'd use for the M1 Garand then. So if we were to use this, same powder as my M1 Garand loads, at the low end you're looking at 2,300 feet per second. On the high end you're looking at about 25. So you're roughly looking at 400 to 500 feet a second difference in velocity between the M1 Garand and 7.62x39. Now that's not a lot because, you know, there's more space in this cartridge than there is in this one, but you're talking about half the bullet weight, or not even half. This is 150, this is 123 to 125. You're talking a 25 grain difference, which is a huge amount of weight for a projectile, going slower. So I don't usually talk about politics on this channel, but when I saw that, ironically enough with the M1 Garand discussion here, when I saw that clip of Jerry Nadler saying that, that just kind of pissed me off because this can drop a bull moose. Not very well. You know, there's going to be people who will say that's not powerful enough. You need a 300 Holland or a 300 Winchester Magnum to do that. But you're talking about how, I believe it was Jack O'Connor who was able to drop elephants with a 7x57 Mauser, which is less powerful than this. But there are going to be some people that will just argue semantics. But this, depending on the state you're in, you may not even be able to legally hunt white-tailed deer with this cartridge. So for you to go up there and say that, well, we aren't going to ban the M1 Garand because it's old, it's antiquated, the cartridge it uses isn't as powerful as the 223 or the 7.62x39, it just goes to show the ignorance of these politicians, because honestly, this cartridge is basically just an updated form of the 30-30. And I know people will say that's not true because it's a smaller case and a lighter bullet and blah, 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 blah. velocity-wise, it's a 30 caliber, going at about the same speed as a 30-30, depending on the bullet weight you use. It's just a different design and a more modern iteration is what I'd say. So, take of it what you will. I hate going on a politics rant. It's not germane here again. I know I did that earlier with the whole gun community, but anyway. So yes, I enjoy the M1 Garand. I think you will too. It is a part of American culture and history for a reason. It's not the rifle that won World War II, because in truth, World War II would not have been won without British, Canadian, Italian, and Russian troops. So you've got because also people tend to forget about Italy turning about halfway to 3/4 of the way through World War II and helping out the Allies because they killed Mussolini. But anyway, without the aid of all the Allied powers, United States, Britain, France, Italy, and Russia, World War II would not have just solely been ended by the American powers. It's just we came in and helped end it. So it's not the rifle that won World War II, but it's a rifle that helped win World War II, and I can see why. In the face of an army armed with Arisakas and Mauser 98 carbines, the overwhelming firepower of the M1 Garand en masse would have been an intimidating sight to behold. In a time where people are used to 1 to 3, 4, 5 shots at a time, basically having an entire army on the opposite side of a field marching towards you with a rifle that is able to just lay down en masse an entire hail of bullets, reload, and start firing again. I can see why this rifle has remained one of the most iconic in American history. Because, honestly, I wouldn't want to march against a force armed with these even today. Just because if I'm armed with a Mauser like my Yugo M2447, and I see guys marching at me, sitting there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Of course, the one time the bolt actually jams on camera here. Like I said, this action's a bit finicky. And then just go at it again, another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And just keep going on that over and over and over again. Yeah, this rifle would just be a pure form of terror, I think. And it would have as much of a psychological effect on your enemy as much as it does a physical one. That's kind of the same principle as the MG42, where the MG42 fired at such a massive cyclic rate that it wasn't pinpoint accurate. It was more an intimidation factor and meant to keep the soldiers' heads down. It was a suppressive armament. And I could kind of see the M1 Garand holding that same role in the American Army during World War II, because just having a group of like 50 guys marching across a field, laying down fire with one of these, must have been a sight to behold for someone used to Mausers, basically. So, with that out of the way, I hope I've given you a little bit further information on the M1 Garand. There's already a ton of videos on these available on YouTube. It's one of the more popular rifles to review. But I absolutely love them, and I just couldn't help but for my 200 subscribers to go ahead and review this rifle for you. So, with that out of the way, this has been Iron Wings 3187. I do appreciate you guys sticking through with me with my irregular upload schedule. The amount of time and dedication I've not really put into this channel because it's just a hobby. And I really do appreciate you guys subscribing to listen to my voice. I know it's not the easiest to listen to. So, yeah, with that out of the way, this has been Iron Wings 3187. Thank you all 200 of you, for taking your time to listen to this. With that out of the way, hope you guys have a great day. Thanks.